Action cartoons have had a very interesting history in America. While they're best known for sitcoms and super zany tunes, or more recently, adventure series with story arcs, shows that prioritize action scenes, heroes, and villains aren't the most popular genre, or even all that common anymore. But in the 90s and 2000s, they were inescapable. This was an age where the biggest superheroes were migrating from comic books to movies, and the Batman and Spider-Man movies were becoming more iconic than the comic books in the public eye. People wanted to see more heroes and action in motion, so one cartoon decided to make 10 at once. Ben 10 was lightning in a bottle. It was made at the right time and told the right story, and it's still remembered fondly as one of the best cartoons of the 2000s. It brought to life its own memorable characters, interesting alien worlds, and franchise of sequel series that went from good to... What happened here? I was 10 once, and I was Ben once, so I watched my fair share of the original series and enjoyed it, even though action cartoons weren't usually my thing. I fell off about halfway through Alien Force, but maintained positive memories of both series, so it's going to be fun to see what about them holds up to scrutiny years later. I'm only going to be covering classic Ben 10 here, the original 4-season run, but before doing so, I want to know how Ben 10 came to be in the first place. In every episode, the series creation is credited to Man of Action, a vague enough name to always mystify me. Who was this man, and how did he get so action-packed? He must have the strength of 4 men. And that's because it was 4 men. Joe Kelly, Joe Casey, Duncan Rolau, and Stephen T. Siegel founded Man of Action Entertainment in the year 2000, a writing collective focused on action-adventure comics. Most of their early work was for Image, but Stephen T. Siegel had notably co-created the Marvel franchise Big Hero 6 in 1998. Thing is though, they weren't animators by trade when they pitched their ideas to Cartoon Network in 2002. Of all the franchise ideas they tried to sell in a marathon, an early version of Ben 10 was the most successful. In this version of the concept, Ben had red hair and his special identities were human superheroes, possibly versions of himself from other dimensions. But as the show's narrative was fleshed out, they simply decided to replace the superheroes with aliens from other worlds to create more variety and be easier to follow. With the concept finalized and the roles of Gwen and Max refined, production on the show commenced pretty smoothly but pretty oddly. Of the 52 half-hour episodes that would eventually be produced for Ben 10, the Man of Action Quartet only had writing credits on 7. They were still heavily involved, but were more focused on developing the characters than the stories they interacted in. Writers like Thomas Pugley, Glenn Klein, and Marty Eisenberg, among others, were credited on most of the stories. Additionally, a test pilot was produced using the script for the second episode, Washington, BC, that was lost for several years and featured pretty different character designs. The surface clips are a very strange watch, considering how iconic the final designs are. Ben 10's first proper episode, and Then There Were 10, got a sneak peek on Cartoon Network on December 27, 2005, at the tail end of a pretty packed year for the network looking back, before officially premiering on Friday, January 14, 2006. I don't see anyone calling this incarnation Ben 1006 though. You often hear Ben 10 2005, Classic Ben 10, Ben 10 Classic, but I tend to just refer to it as Ben 10, for I have not yet been warped. So anyway, Ben 10 became an overnight hit with Cartoon Network's tween demographic. Merchandise flew off the shelf, with it easily being CN's most profitable show since the Powerpuff Girls. Several TV movies were made, and reviews were pretty positive on its animation, world-building, and morals. It's been a while since it ended on April 15th, 2008, and the sequel series began to get pumped out, but the original still has a snug place in the history of Cartoon Network originals. If not for how commercially successful it was, then probably for the stories.
Oh man, I am gonna get so busted for this.
It started when an alien device did what it did, get shot out of a spaceship to hide it from an evil squid man. It lands on Earth in the mid-2000s, specifically in some American woods where it's found by Ben Tennyson, a 10-year-old boy who's just been let off school for summer vacation, albeit one he has to share with his cousin Gwen and Grandpa Max. When he finds the alien pod, it unleashes a watch-like device that leaps onto his wrist and doesn't come off. But the positive to come out of this is that it can now temporarily turn him into 10 different alien species. With Ben seeing opportunities to be awesome and save the world from weirdos and alien threats, hero time has begun. So yeah, great premise for an action show. You've got kid empowerment to make the adventure more uplifting for the target audience, a rich variety in heroes and abilities, and some interesting lore that can be gradually developed and expanded upon as the show goes on. Ben is a snarky, laid-back tween who frequently goofs off and neglects the rules, so it seems ironic that he's responsible for saving the world all summer. He may be rude, but he's still a good kid who cares deeply for his family and their safety. That shouldn't be ignored just because he misbehaves. What I really like about how they characterize him is that when he transforms into the aliens, his personality is completely intact. He looks, sounds, and moves completely different, but he's still the adventurous kid you're stuck with no matter what. And I'd say that's the sign of an effective and memorable character. As for all the aliens he can become, 10 at the start with an additional 6 coming later, I'll just do another lightning round. One word, pyrokinesis. Pretty rad, understandably used often. Kind of adorable. Love the design and weight to his actions. More unique idea, always fun to see what it can do. Small and nerdy, but very resourceful. I always knew there was something wrong with him. Sure, whatever. Cool design that enhances the powers. Marketably useful. Criminally underused, but he must have been a hassle to animate. Kirby, but less disturbing. You're an ugly fella. Ultraman is a one-off event. Rob Paulson doing what he does best. I don't think the later aliens are quite as inventive and iconic as the original set, but they get the job done and show that Ben has more challenges awaiting him with more original means of saving the day. Gwen is Ben's cousin, and the kid he's stuck with for most of the summer, much to the annoyance of both. They never got along before the Omnitrix came into the picture, and now have an excuse to bond, still bickering like 10-year-olds, but the moments where they get along and help each other out get more endearing as the series goes on. Gwen's always got a smart answer to the situation, or a comeback for a joke, but the more they lean into her association with magic, the more interesting she becomes as an action heroine. Grandpa Max has to be my favorite character though. It isn't just because he's the most mature of the trio, it has more to do with his role in the stories. It's gradually revealed he's had some past experiences with aliens, so that comes into play a lot and brings the gang closer together, and he still remains a stern but loving figure. The main villain is Vilgax, this green cephalopod who wants the Omnitrix for himself. He's big and menacing without any issue, being more threatening than he ever is funny. I can respect them playing a tough baddie completely straight. It keeps the tone more grounded. As does Kevin 11, a delinquent who Ben soon opposes the behavior of and accidentally transforms into a mutant hybrid of aliens. We all have former friends like this is just the logical extreme of that sort of falling out. He's a pretty tragic villain, but still a great one. Dr. Animo is a mad scientist obsessed with genetic engineering, usually with a knack for making harmless animals more beastly. He's pretty good at being insane, and if he comes into view, you know you're gonna get some interesting monsters coming out of his head. Zombozo is some bozo who's the leader of an evil circus troupe, each with their own powers. If you're afraid of clowns, there you go, they speak for themselves. Hex is an evil magician who becomes Gwen's archenemy, at least before Charmcaster hits the scene. I like her more, if just for the fact she's more down to earth. Not all the visitors are bad guys. On the contrary, there's Tetrax, a former bounty hunter and member of the same species as Diamond Head, quick to come down and warn Ben to take the Omnitrix's powers seriously. Another notable ally whose species is in the Omnitrix is Azimuth, the Watcher's creator, and a smart little scientist who has the best intentions in its production. That's all I can really say without going into his story, which has some spoilers, but I hope this has been a big enough survey to show you this cast means business. Everyone's different and got their own story to tell. It's a very strong lineup, and not just in muscles.
This watch gives me a new alien out of the blue and all it can do is roll around. Totally no fair.
Oh, that's right. Don't worry about the fact some giant planet sucker's about to wipe Earth off the face of the universe, because that's fair.
What makes the writing on Ben 10 so different from every other show I've watched is that it doesn't feel like it's for a TV show. It feels like it's for a comic book. That probably sounds like an insult, but I promise that gives the story a very unique feel. It's more obvious when they're expositing information or placing a pun ahead of action, more frequently than other shows I've already given a whirl, such as Kim Possible or Danny Phantom. The latter you could call Spider-Man with ghosts. I'm not a superhero comic expert, but I can tell these conventions were a staple of the written page. This entirely comes from the fact the creators came from the comic book industry, so it's like the staff were bringing their favorite things about the medium into animation. Since my interests don't directly align with theirs, maybe I should veer back to saying what's good about the show in its own right. With how many aliens appear, you can count on the action scenes not just being great, but varied in their composition, tension, and most importantly, location. A fight with forearms is going to have a very different feel from a fight with Wildmutt, and it's not like Ben's invincible in any of these forms. The watch only works in small bursts, and seems to get less reliable over the course of the series, so with the artistic liberty of you barely getting a clear idea of how long Ben can go hero, the length of the battles is also unpredictable. It's also neat to see the characters develop at a gradual pace, Ben getting more experienced, Gwen bickering a little less, Max becoming more open about his past. You expect everyone to learn something about each other over the course of a summer vacation, but still retain their most recognizable traits. Speaking of their vacation, I don't think they travel to every state in the USA, but they cover a mighty lot of ground, so if you live in the contiguous states, never give up hope that the RV will stop and visit. When, where, and why is the question.
This may be of some use in the meantime.
Oh man, are you serious? Hold on, you said you needed this to get off the planet.
Selective disinformation.
Huh?
He lied.
Season 1 gets things off to a decent start, and things only get more decent from there on in. It pays to watch from the beginning, because you gradually watch Ben learn some pretty basic lessons in morality that any 10-year-old should know with this much responsibility. The good old being a hero is its own reward and listen to your elders shebangs. It's not always easy to trust Ben as a character that'll take these lessons to heart 100% of the time, but the danger this trouble causes is always clear and never dull. Sometimes frustrating, there are some pretty weak episodes here, but there's way more that get the ball rolling properly. The story of the Omnitrix isn't completely dumped onto you from the start. You don't even get its name until the 5th episode. They just call it the Watch in the first 4. The emphasis is more on Ben's adventures than his powers, but they're both given plenty of time to establish themselves. I also like how they gradually reveal Max's past with the plumbers. He seems all too comfortable with these new alien encounters for a 60-something, and there's a couple slips of the tongue that make more sense when you get to the finale. It's always possible the first season of the show could be the only one, so it's amazing they were able to tell a full story with surprises in just 13 episodes, to say nothing of what they can do for the next 39. It should go without saying that the animation on this show is amazing, so I'll say it. This is one of those early HD shows like The Replacements or Chowder that had a distinct texture to the art style that may have looked messy when it aired, but is really pretty now that we can see it in all its glory. It's odd, the backgrounds look printed but organic at the same time. The color choices and geometry are fairly realistic on Earth, but get a lot more surreal in a spaceship or alien or monster base, and ethereal green being a favorite choice of palette. The character designs are appealing too, and more importantly, flexible. Especially for the aliens, they're given a lot of life whenever they burst into action. Anime-esque action cartoons and flat-out shonen were exceedingly common on Cartoon Network around this time, but none emulated the style more closely within the Cartoon Network studio's lineage, giving it a distinct identity amongst their other productions. The art and animation mostly stayed the same across the original series, but you might notice the line art getting thinner at the start of Season 3. That's a common thing to see as a show goes on, and doesn't make the quality better or worse.
I can't change back! I'm stuck like this! Look at what you've done!
Oh man, is there anything I'm not going to get blamed for today?
More locations, more enemies, and more aliens. Maybe less of the latter if you consider Ghost Freak's removal from the Omnitrix becoming an enemy. To compensate, this was the season to introduce Cannonbolt and Wildvine. Cannonbolt quickly became a favorite for the writers, getting almost as much action as Forearms and Diamond Head. As for more villains, mostly in the one-off department. Good one-offs to be fair, and the more memorable Season 1 villains had strong follow-ups. Kevin is the most common foe, appearing in 3 different episodes, the first showing his transformation into his iconic hybrid form. To contrast with the predominantly urban settings of the first season, 2 was open to exploring more exotic locations, like a summer camp, ancient pyramids, and an underwater mansion. More intriguing is one episode set in an alternate timeline where Gwen got the Omnitrix instead of Ben. This isn't the only time they loosened the continuity to tell less conventional stories. Needless to say, they were bent on making sure Ben 10 didn't get stale, and I'd say they did a great job of improving upon the first season.
I have the most wonderful surprise.
Season 3 was a season of mood swings. Plenty of episodes provide some serious stories and action, while others are pretty darn goofy. I don't think Merry Christmas or Game Over could have been made in any other season. Then there were more low-key episodes that don't have the most dramatic stories on paper, but they somehow manage. There was an effort to mess with the audience's expectations for an action show, and while I think it often got too silly for its own good, I can't fault them for trying. With that said, it's not often you see a show have a midlife crisis 1 year into its run. It's not like their audience had grown up that much, there was still magic in the air, and romance too, as childhood crushes and long-distance partners enter the fray. Love isn't a constant plot element, but it seems the writers are endorsing the fandom's shipping goggles more. I believe the third season's a slight step back from 2, but still better than 1. However, the best is yet to come.
Guess that's the end of our fun day at the beach.
Yeah, well, maybe your fun's over, but my fun is just starting.
As soon as the watch recharges.
The first 3 seasons are good in their own ways, especially the second, but 4 is downright impressive. It's sort of a miracle that it's home to most of the show's very best episodes. They aren't the flashiest or most dramatic, but the character development was paying off big time. No matter what stories or mistakes they make, they're still going to be likable because of everything they've seen and are continuing to learn. Comparing a more subdued and personal scene from the season 1 episode Last Laugh, where Grandpa's having a conversation with Ben about fear, to Gwen teaching Ben how to dance in the season 4 episode Big Fat Alien Wedding, it's astounding to think these two have gotten so cordial. These 2 scenes are definitely my favorite character moments on the show because they demonstrate what Ben's family can teach him. You couldn't have a scene like the latter at the start of the show. It's earned. Another reason I admire season 4 is that they didn't crack under the pressure. Ben 10's popularity was rapidly growing, to the point 3 different specials aired during the era of different varieties. There was a TV movie, The Secret of the Omnitrix, an hour-long 2-parter, Ben 10 vs. the Negative 10, and a live-action adaptation, Race Against Time. What do you want me to say about it? The animated offering stayed strong enough to the end, with a finale leaving you expecting more, and more you will get. This is all still the first chapter in a long-running franchise, so what are the best things about it right out the gate? Here are my 11 favorite episodes. Why top 11? Because it's 10 stories and one of them's a 2-parter, what do you think? Kevin 11 introduces a great character and a great conflict for Ben. This is the first time we see him befriend a person close to his age, but it's in a grimy part of town with no rules or loyalty. It's about peer pressure as much as what happens when one's gift is considered a curse. Goodbye and Good Riddance managed to pull off a closed book of a finale, then turn it into an open-ended one. On the outset, summer's over and we meet Ben's parents, so there's a feeling of finality, but they swing the door wide open for new ideas if they ever got a season 5. It's a finale that doesn't feel like the end, and that's impressive. The return sets up something awesome, and Be Afraid of the Dark is that thing. You can't go wrong with a 44-minute epic where Ghost Freak returns, Max and Gwen go to space, and the world almost falls to eternal darkness, with more than enough time to flesh their plot out. The Visitor sees Max meet up with his old love interest Xylene, and we learn about her involvement in the Omnitrix getting sent to Earth in the first place. After so many weeks of fighting aliens, Ben has every right to be skeptical, but Max and Xylene's romance is touching and believable enough to validate this story. Perfect Day has a great setup and better execution. Ben has a day that's too good to be true, but it's a dream world weaved by Enoch. This is a place where fears are tested and Enoch and the Forever Knights can be anything imaginable, so a lot of strange thoughts and creative visuals are possible. Ben 10 vs. the Negative 10 was the last classic Ben 10 production made before they moved into Alien Force, and they left by giving it their all. Tons of memorable villains bouncing off each other, and a rather slice-of-life story with this underutilized Cooper kid to balance out the action. Back with a Vengeance is the 2 finale with 2 villains in 2 dimensions to fight across. Listen, it's a bit hard to believe they'd remove the Omnitrix from Ben's wrist permanently, but the road to that point and the battle to get it back make for an engaging story with tons of awesome visuals, so I'm very satisfied. Secrets is an excellent culmination of the first season, and leaves it on a high enough note to lead into the second. Max really shines here now that we're getting his true colors, and Vilgax and Ben's first proper interactions together were a long time coming. Secret of the Omnitrix had the ideal story for a Ben 10 TV movie, executed as well as it could be. The Omnitrix is going haywire, being more helpful but also at greater risk of killing Ben, so he and Gwen go into space and encounter a universe that could destroy itself for the Omnitrix's power. As much as we knew about it before, the absolute scale of the watch and its properties have never been this engrossing before, and I like how it taps into why Ben fights evil. Is he doing it for himself or others? Is there even a right way to be a savior? The answer might not surprise you, but the journey there will. My favorite episode would have to be Grudge Match though, for giving a similar fix of far-out alien menace and thrills, but with more impressive fight scenes and a tighter story about Ben and Kevin becoming an unlikely team-up. Unsurprisingly, many of my favorites have dense plots, engaging locales, and tons of action and humor, and a lot of my least favorite episodes are just kinda boring. Tourist Trap is about Ben and Gwen messing about at a rundown tourism destination, Sparksville. Them bonding over finding ironic enjoyment in the park is nice, but the rest is boredom followed by a stretch of a reason for a battle. Side Effects is the sick episode. I don't think I need to explain why this isn't high art. Getting a bunch of Ben's aliens sick in different ways doesn't do a whole lot if it's still going to be gross for no good reason. Merry Christmas is lunacy. Another rundown tourist destination, this one with a curse that turns Max into Santa and Ben and Gwen into elves. It's got as little Christmas spirit as you can fathom, and the ending does a pretty poor job resolving the cases of all the kids that suffered in Holiday Village. The KRAKKEN's a pretty boring early episode with a predictable lesson, dull color palette, and unremarkable side characters. I can cut it some slack for being one of the very earliest episodes, not so much for a small problem. It's similarly boring and kind of forces Ben to be stuck as grey matter, so we can learn more about this very uninteresting evil nerd, when they could have spent more time and energy making a story about Enoch, who makes his debut here. It's a shame I remember this as the episode with the annoying nerd, and not for a much better villain, but Enoch and his Forever Boys got better after this, and so did much of the show. So in conclusion, I really like Ben 10, the first show at least. It was always just as good as, if not better than I remembered, never worse. The writing and animation have held up pretty well, and I bet it will continue to entertain future generations. If you're too young to remember the height of its popularity, no judging, it's old enough to donate blood this year, you can still jump into it, no problem. The art style and music are very mid-aughts, but the story and characters remain timeless, and make it a solid recommendation from me. And it's funny, way back in my earlier reviews, I'd mentioned that I'm not a fan of action cartoons whenever I get to one, but now that I've seen so many good ones and reacquainted myself with Ben 10, consider me a fan. I really like this sort of content, and I'm pretty excited to see where this franchise goes from here. I won't cover Alien Force for a time yet, but trust me, I'm eager for more aliens and more fun.
The invasion will continue.
More Zim on the way.
Oh man, I'm never gonna get this thing to work.